Good evening, you're with Newsreview. The Chief Minister did not address the United Nations this week, opting to attend Brexit meetings in London instead. In his place, the Deputy Chief Minister spoke at the UN's Fourth Committee in New York. Dr. Garcia said it appears the United Nations does not wish to work with Gibraltar in its decolonisation, despite the UK having made clear it will support those non-self-governing territories which want to be removed from the UN's list. He put to the chairman that the lack of progress meant something, somewhere, was not working. The session, witnessed by local interns in Washington, also included an address from the Self-Determination for Gibraltar group. Christine Vasquez was in New York.
Hardliners would have been disappointed by the fact that Spain's address included its usual rhetoric. But pragmatists would have noticed a change. Spain has extended the hand of friendship, but always without prejudice. The Deputy Chief Minister pointed out to the UN that despite the fact that virtually half the world had been freed from colonial rule in the decades after the Second World War, thanks in part to the work of the UN Committee of 24, the number of territories on the UN list had not changed in the last 30 years. It's 3 decades dedicated to decolonisation.
The Special Committee was established in 1961. That is over half a century ago. Only 1 territory has been removed from the list in the last 30 years. At that rate, the work of the committee will last for 510 years. Mr. Chairman, something somewhere is not working.
José García told the committee that it had a duty to consider the ROC's decolonisation in the same way it had considered those territories that had gone before. But he said it was almost as if it didn't want to. It has, he said, not sent a visiting mission or said what changes are necessary in the ROC's constitution to secure removal from the list. According to Dr. Garcia, the answer as to why there's been no movement lies in a huge contradiction.
Spain complains that Gibraltar is a colony, when its outdated attitude towards Gibraltar is precisely what has caused the UN decolonisation process to stall, and Gibraltar remains on the list.
José Garcia told the UN that Gibraltar was in direct Brexit discussions with the different member states, including Spain, to ensure that people and citizens do not suffer as a result of the departure from the EU. He welcomed Spain's new positive approach on cooperation, reflected, he said, in the Spanish Premier's address before the General Assembly. At this session, however, Spain fell short of the commitment given by the Spanish Premier, Pedro Sánchez, limiting itself to hoping the new relationship proved prosperous to the Campo area. No specific mention of Gibraltar here. In fact, a commitment to those living in the Campo that their rights will be defended by the Spanish government in all negotiations on Gibraltar. Although there was a reference to Brussels and to the consensus resolution in the address, the specific call for a renewal of bilateral talks was absent. Instead, a call for renewal of talks and cooperation for the benefit of citizens on both sides of the frontier, but with no mention of the makeup of this forum. The address equaled that of every year, but one would perhaps perceive a sheer veil over it. The Spanish ambassador said the colonial reality was even more unjustified coming from an ally and friend like the UK. The UK's behaviour on the subject, it said, had been at best erratic. But it added the problem was not just political. Having a colony in Spanish territory, he said, had negative effects on the Campo. The ROC's fiscal regime and the cheaper cost of tobacco has distorted the economy and contributed to the deterioration of public safety. Spain, he said, had no problem with Gibraltar's prosperity, but he saw great scope for improved relations.
Meanwhile, the United Kingdom strongly and unambiguously stood by Gibraltar this week when exercising its right of reply to Spain's statement at the United Nations. Describing the ROC's parliamentary democracy as vigorous, it said that while its position remains that the fundamentals of its constitutional relationship are right, it's open to proposals put forward by Gibraltar. Spain, too, replied that the UN stressing the urgency of negotiating Gibraltar's legal status post-Brexit and adding that the lack of such an agreement could have disastrous economic repercussions for the area and the people on both sides of the frontier. The Spanish ambassador said Spain was willing to negotiate and reach agreements, but also mentioned the so-called veto over EU-UK agreements applying to the ROC. In other news, Financial Services Minister Albert Isola this week told a delegation in Tel Aviv that Israel and Gibraltar's greatest resources are their people who have achieved great things with limited land mass and limited resources. Hundreds of delegates attended the first ever Gibraltar Day in Israel, organised by the Gibraltar-Israel Chamber of Commerce, together with the Gibraltar government. The events began with a mission to Haifa, the technological centre, and continued on Wednesday with a series of workshops and panel discussions. Minister Isola said he hoped this would become an annual event. Jonathan Sacramento was in Israel.
For the first time, the Gibraltar-Israeli Chamber of Commerce, Gibrel, and the Gibraltar government have teamed up to host Gibraltar Day in Israel. Here from Tel Aviv, the country's financial capital, the government and Gibrel are organizing a series of events revolving around the blockchain, DLT, Gibraltar's finance center, and why Israeli companies should choose the Rock as a place to do business.
I think the partnership already exists. We have a number of firms from Israel which are applying in Gibraltar for DLT licenses. So the partnership is already there. What we're seeking to do is further develop that, strengthen relationships, build new relationships, and see how our fintech can benefit from the knowledge and experience that there is and the expertise there is in Israel by putting people together. Israel, like Gibraltar, its biggest resource and its only resource is its people. And so we have a lot of common ground and there's a lot of common business. And what we need to do is to continue to work to improve that and increase that for the benefit of our respective communities.
Okay, so first of all, as I mentioned in my speech, I think to see, as a chairwoman of the Gibraltar-Israel Chamber of Commerce, to see that there is a Gibraltar Day in London, Gibraltar Day in Hong Kong, Gibraltar Day in Singapore. And I said, as a very patriotic Israeli, I said it can't be that TLV is not on the map. We see so much potential. I can tell you that the minister has been busy today with so many meetings. Everybody's just grab him for a few minutes to talk to him about some businesses that they want to bring over to Gibraltar. So it shows a very good sign, and this event was not fully booked, overbooked.
I think it's really relevant. I managed the Tau Innovation competition. It's an annual competition by Tel Aviv University once a year. One of the verticals is cryptocurrency, and about 30 to 40 different startups and companies apply to this program. Each one of them look for investment, look for suppliers, look for a lot of other things that you can find in Gibraltar, and a lot of new things that I learned here during the day.
So I'm the CEO of Haifa Economic Corporation, which is representing Haifa municipality and which is driving business and economy in Haifa for many years. We met delegations from Gibraltar several times, and we think that we have a lot in common, and we can do some very interesting things together, mainly in the high-tech area and the life sciences, the medicine area.
I work as a mobile operations at WalkMe. We basically provide a step-by-step guidance for website owners. Ayala came to Israel after she heard about my story, and they came to the office to hear about the technology. They got very excited, and we might do some business with them.
We're interested in collaborating with the Gibraltar ecosystem, with the unique innovators, political leaders, and of course, those who are interested in investing and being a part of the innovation here in Israel.
Mental health was a big topic of discussion this week. The Minister for Health and Care said the health authority spent 6% of its budget on mental health in 2017. Neil Kossa highlighted the increase from 2% when the GSLP Liberals took office in 2011. Mr. Kossa was responding to an article in the Panorama newspaper which claimed morale among mental health workers generally is low, with 2 psychiatric nurses suffering nervous breakdowns. Meanwhile, the GGCA union said it will be focusing on mental health in the workplace and will be carrying out a campaign over the next year to reduce the stigma associated to it. It hopes to make positive changes on how mental health is recognised and dealt with, and will be setting up a working group to further these aims. It encourages members to engage in the Ask Twice campaign by talking with colleagues. It adds it may be difficult for managers or co-workers to spot the signs and give them support. Gibraltar's first ever dedicated child and adolescent psychology service will start in January. This was announced by the Minister for Health to coincide with World Mental Health Day. Neil Kossa says this service represents a Gibraltar-specific format based on the NHS's Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, known as CAMS. He describes it as a much-needed service, saying it's been the focus of representations by various charities and associations and has been in the making over the last 18 months.
The system that we have adopted for Gibraltar will be Gibraltar specific. As with any health service that we provide, it has to be tailored to Gibraltar's specific circumstances, but it is a service very much based on the NHS's clinical and young persons mental health service.
So how will the system work?
Well, we will bring over clinical psychologists who specialise in mental health services for children and young people, and they will lead on the development of a multidisciplinary, multi-agency service. But the important thing is that it will be part of the neurodisability paediatric service of the GHA, and so it will be providing a service for children and for young people, for those without additional needs, but also for those that have additional needs. And as you will know, it is a part of the mental health service that has not been provided before, and it is a part of the system that charities and associations that very much are concerned with mental health have brought to my attention from the very beginning. When I was appointed for Minister for Health, it has taken 18 months to take the right advice from our mental health management and mental health experts in Gibraltar in conjunction with those charities, and we very much believe that the model that we will adopt for Gibraltar will be hopefully sufficient for our purposes. But of course, once the experts come to Gibraltar and they are actually based here, we will very much develop the service as the advice is developed.
On Wednesday, World Mental Health Day was marked with a silent march down Main Street from outside Parliament to the office of the Chief Minister. The organisers, the Mental Welfare Society, said mental health is as important as physical health. They called on the government to invest in it much more seriously.
Every country in the world is facing and failing to properly deal with a mental health crisis, epidemics of anxiety and depression. That's the conclusion of a review by a team of global experts organised by the Lancet Medical Journal. That international finding resonated with the local messages on display around today's silent march.
I think the thinking behind it was silent, because I think a lot of people suffer in silence. Silence as a way of respect for grieving families here who have suffered very tragic deaths in the last few years, and a very recent one.
How well or otherwise is Gibraltar faring in looking after people with mental health issues?
I don't think it's faring nearly as well as it should. You hear stories time and time again about the fact that people don't feel supported enough by the system, and I think we certainly need to start very early on, as one of the posters said, early detection, diagnosis and treatment.
You are pushing at an open door as far as I am concerned. You have my full support. I'm really grateful to you to having taken time out to come and join this walk.
Mental health has to be invested in much, much more seriously.
Mental health is as important and needs to have the investment. I mean, Minister Costa has come out saying that they're investing 6% of the GHA budget. That seems to me a ludicrously low amount, so I think we need to do much more than that.
According to the well-respected medical journal The Lancet, the causes and options for treatment for mental health issues are much better understood today than they used to. Yet, the quality of mental health services is routinely worse than services for physical health.
And the GSD launched a mental health survey which aims to gain greater insight into the inner well-being of people in the community, identify how Gibraltar's mental health service is performing and see how it can be improved. Coinciding with World Mental Health Day, the opposition said this will be at the centre of its health policy, adding there will be a particularly strong focus on young people at a press conference. The GSD said more needs to be done in terms of resources, equipment and support with its Healthy Minds Matter survey, the first step towards devising a programme.
The GSD says it carried out a consultation exercise with relevant local groups, as well as Dr. Ian Banks from the European Men's Mental Health Forum, on the potential value of carrying out a survey.
Well, the main aim is to try and obtain a glimpse of the inner feelings of our community. see how people actually feel, how they cope on a day-to-day, and what are the drivers that may have an impact in their emotions and stability.
The survey is completely anonymous, with the first part relating to general well-being and the second targeted at service users, families and friends.
We did a lot of research looking at the Care Quality Commission in the UK, how they have surveyed members of the community in the UK, and also other well-being questionnaires and surveys which have been done around the world. And then we just collated all that information together. We held a consultation process with different groups to see if they wanted to further adapt it into our local community, and also take on feedback with extra questions which they were interested in obtaining answers if possible. The survey has 50 questions. The first 17, I believe, are to do with the general well-being, and the rest are to do with the services and the current way that Gibraltar caters for mental health. So I think it will be very interesting to see what people actually have to say. It's completely anonymous, which I think is it's very important, and I hope people will be able to open up.
The theme for this year's World Mental Health Day is Young People in a Changing World, and the GSD intends to make this an integral part of its domestic policy.
Well, we want to place mental health at the centre of our health services policy for the upcoming manifesto, and we will be preparing and devising this programme and hope to make further announcements in coming weeks. We think it's very important to give an impetus to mental health services and to do much more in the resources in this important area.
The survey is open for 2 weeks and can be accessed online at tiny.cc/GSD survey or the GSD Media Facebook page, and also at their office in College Lane. The final statistics will be made available to the public.
And we'll be back with more of this week's stories after this break.
So now, so new, so good, so you, so ripe, so ready, so overly due, so funny, so cool, so fancy, so fit, so blasting, so lasting, so strictly legit, so movie, so prime, so slick, so swoon, so Disney, so Deezer, so light up the room, so what, so epic, so out of the box, so on demand, so ready to rock, so true, so woo, so all the night through, so Sophie, so monster, you know what to do. Whew. Sophie Digital Entertainment System is now included as part of your Monster Bundle, or available exclusively for Jib Telecom broadband customers from only £10 a month. So apply now in store or at sophie.gi. Terms and conditions apply. Oh, that rhymes.
Welcome back. It was a busy week in court too. On Tuesday, a 25-year-old local man accused of bottling his victim on the head and stabbing him whilst he slept was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Dwayne Moore of Varrelbeg Estate pleaded guilty to the charge of inflicting grievous bodily harm at a previous court appearance. He pleaded not guilty to the charge of conspiracy to inflict GBH with intent, with this charge now placed on file after negotiations between the Crown and the defence. Before today's sentencing at the Supreme Court, Sir Pendry Magistrate Anthony Dudley sat at a Newton hearing, a special court session held when two parties offer conflicting evidence or circumstances. This type of hearing involves a judge, without the presence of a jury, taking a decision on which party he feels is telling the truth, based on the evidence presented to him. There were conflicting details from defence and the Crown regarding the assault, with defence lawyer Chris Miles arguing that the defendant, Moore, had not forced himself into the property. He also argued that at the time of the assault, the victim was awake and had engaged in a fight. For their part, the Crown argued that the assailant had forced entry by kicking down a panel that had been affixed to a door. They also argued that the victim had been asleep in bed when Moore bottled him on the head and then stabbed him. Based on the evidence presented, Saipendri Magistrate Anthony Dudley said that he could not be sure that the door to the property had been forced open, but he did believe that the victim had been asleep or in a state of semi-consciousness when he was assaulted, pointing out that there was no evidence of a struggle within the property. Justice Dudley highlighted the seriousness of the offence, pointing to the evidence that Moore and two others had bought 3 knives at a local supermarket. He also said that the assault had been premeditated and that the victim, who was asleep at the time, was vulnerable. Justice Dudley also mentioned the involvement of drugs, saying the assault had resulted from Moore's accusation that the victim had stolen 13 grams of cocaine and an electronic device from him. Dwayne Moore has been sentenced to 10 years in prison, with account taken for the time served. Also this week, a husband and wife in a child indecent images case were sentenced to 30 months in prison and 12 months suspended, respectively. 32-year-old Bobby J. Simmons from the United States and 26-year-old local woman Lauren Robles were convicted unanimously in June on 2 charges of possessing nearly 7,500 indecent images of children. Simmons was also convicted on a separate charge relating to 1 additional image. The couple maintained their innocence throughout the trial.
The pair were arrested in June 2016 following a tip-off from the UK's National Crime Agency that an address in Gibraltar was being used to download indecent images of children, over 800 of which were classified as Category A. Robles was not originally a suspect until it came to light that files had been accessed whilst her husband was away. When handing down the sentence, Chief Justice Anthony Dudley took into account aggravating factors, such as the young age of children depicted, the high number of victims, as well as the volume of images. He also made reference to the deliberate search terms found on the computer's history and the relatively lengthy period of time the images were in the couple's possession. Mr. Justice Dudley also mentioned mitigating factors, including that both husband and wife have no previous convictions, and the fact that Simmons himself had been abused as a child. He also made reference to Robles's wholly misplaced loyalty and delusional belief in her husband's innocence. Simmons received 30 months for count 2 and 15 months for count 3, with no separate penalty for the first charge. His wife received 12 months and 6 months for the 2 counts she was convicted of, to be suspended partly as a result of her long-standing history of anxiety and depression. All sentences are to run concurrently, with time served taken into account.
And a local man charged with 19 counts of fraud and who cheated people of almost £80,000 was sent to prison for almost 2 years. He'd pleaded guilty to charges at a previous court appearance. In a pyramid scheme, a fraudster promises great profits for little or no risk. It requires people pay a fee to enter an investment scheme. They are then required to recruit others and are then paid out money if they do this successfully. In the scheme, money is not invested in any product. Instead, it's passed up the chain of investors, and because pyramid schemes are unauthorized and make no profits, you're unlikely to recover any lost investment. While the fraudster at the top will collect most of the profits, those who entered the scheme later on end up losing out. 25-year-old Caelan Prescott of Vineyards operated one of these pyramid schemes between 2014 and 2016. During this time, he offered investment opportunities to people he knew in Gibraltar, saying he was working on behalf of a contact in Spain. He made almost £80,000, which he later spent on personal lifestyle expenses and gambling. Puny Judge Christopher Butler today sentenced Caelan Prescott to 22 months in prison, saying that Prescott had been motivated by greed. Government this week agreed to recite 12 bins, according to representatives from the Beacon Press. The shop had earlier this week gathered 500 signatures calling for these to be relocated, citing serious health and safety concerns. According to the company, government will move the bins to the area on Linewall Road that had been previously approved at the planning stage. Beacon Press says government has told them necessary works will start in the next 2 months, with the loading and unloading bay to be relocated shortly after. Local musician Holly Buhaja is involved with the music of the latest series of the iconic British sci-fi television show Doctor Who. The singer revealed on a social media post that her vocals can be heard in the new series, which started last weekend. Michael Beltran spoke to her from London.
I can pretty much only confirm that I've done vocals for the soundtrack of pretty much it.
And can you tell us like how they approached you and how they heard about you?
Well, I know the composer quite well. I studied with him at the National Film and TV School, so he pretty much got me on board to do vocals through our connection there, really.
And so when you heard that he was going to be the new composer, because they announced that not long ago with the whole restructuring of the new series, what was your reaction when you heard that he was going to be a part of something that big?
I mean, when I heard the news, I was absolutely thrilled for him. Studying at NSTS, you kind of develop this camaraderie with the people that you're surrounded with. So, I mean, like, you know, I gotten to know him really well, and he really deserves it. He's a really talented guy. I'm really happy for him.
Did you know about Doctor Who? Had you ever watched it?
I obviously know of Doctor Who. I think everyone in the English-speaking world and beyond that knows of Doctor Who. It's iconic, really.
Will you be watching to hear back the work that you did on the show, and maybe try and listen out to bits that you did?
No doubt. I think everyone of my family members will be doing the exact same thing.
And that's all for News Review this week. You can find our stories on our website, gbc.gi, and you can also follow our regular updates on our Twitter and Facebook page. Thank you very much for watching, and from all of us on the team, good night.